Breaking news tonight. The Pentagon has announced just a short time ago that they've undergone the first airstrikes on ISIS targets in Syria. They are now underway. Just moments ago, we're learning that those targets could include areas around Raqqa, known as ISIS strongholds. President Obama giving the order after, of course, promising to degrade and, quote, ultimately destroy the brutal terror group known as ISIS. We are also going along, military officials tell us, with partner nations on these airstrikes. These targets could include command and control centers, supply rights, training centers, anywhere there's a large troop presence, any way to degrade the capability of ISIS. Joining me now is Alex Marquardt, who is reporting in the region just over the border from Syria in Turkey. Alex, what do you know?
Good evening, Juju. Well, we believe that these airstrikes would be taking place, as you say, against ISIS strongholds in the northern part of Syria. This is the part of Syria where ISIS has had most of its control, where they have been carrying out their attacks, where they have been fighting against the regime forces, stretching all the way from northern Syria to the northeastern part of Syria, and then, of course, into Iraq. That would include Aleppo, which is the biggest city in Syria. It would include Raqqa, which, as you mentioned, is considered the headquarters of ISIS. That's where they have maintained their command and control centers. That's where they've been holding foreign hostages, including those 2 American journalists who have been executed. Over the course of the past few days, ISIS has been pushing north into the Kurdish areas. So that's where we believe that these American airstrikes would be taking place. Now, the Pentagon is saying that these airstrikes are taking place not just by the United States, that they're being carried out with what are being called partner nations, other nations in the region. The Pentagon says that the U.S. is the only non-Arab country to be carrying out these airstrikes against ISIS targets. But beyond that, there are very few details. We know that the U.S. is using Tomahawk missiles as well as manned bomber and attack aircraft, and that President Obama made the decision earlier today to go after ISIS. This is something that they had been talking about over the course of the past few weeks. The U.S. trying to build a coalition of willing partners, not just in the West, but among Arab countries in the region as well. Clearly, they felt confident enough that this coalition had come together and made that final decision today to move the fight against ISIS from Iraq now into Syria.
And yet, Alex, we're discussing that, the UN General Assembly is about to get underway here in New York, world leaders gathering here in New York, and ISIS releasing a video just today of a French national that they claim they have kidnapped and that they are threatening to behead in retaliation for French airstrikes in the region. That must weigh heavy on decision makers tonight.
Absolutely, not just on the French, but on the British and the Americans as well. Of course, we've seen over the last few weeks 2 Americans and 1 Brit killed, according to ISIS, in response to the building of this coalition, in response to American attacks inside Iraq. Now, of course, with these attacks expanding into Syria, that's going to play a major role with these hostages that ISIS is still holding. They've already shown that they have at least 2 more Brits. We understand that they have 2 more Americans, and now this French citizen as well. So that's obviously going to be considering a factor for the French, British, and American leaders when they do carry out these airstrikes. But at the same time, they've made it very clear that they want to go along with the U.S. in destroying and degrading ISIS.
Well, Alex, we've talked about the idea, just to recap, that the airstrikes targeting ISIS are now underway. The Pentagon confirming for us tonight they're using manned aircraft, Tomahawk missiles, all with the mission towards degrading and ultimately destroying the regime known as ISIS. But this is also causing a huge flow of refugees into Turkey, which is where you are, Alex. Tell us what you're seeing about this huge streaming in of refugees.
Well, ISIS has made a major push into the northern part of Syria, which is right on the border with where I am. It's a Kurdish part of Syria. And over the past 4 days, more than 130,000 Kurdish refugees have streamed across the border. That is an unprecedented exodus of refugees who have left Syria in one go. Turkey's already hosting 1.5 million people, 1.5 million Syrians. And so to see this number of people coming across the border is absolutely astounding. It speaks to the level of fear that ISIS has struck into the heart of so many people. I was on the border just a couple hours ago speaking with these refugees, asking them, well, what would happen if you stayed in these towns as ISIS took over? And they all said, well, we would be executed. And at the same time, just a few hours ago, they were telling me angrily about how the U.S. wasn't doing anything, how the U.S. wasn't stepping in to help them. And if the U.S. didn't do something soon, it would be far too late.
Alex, I want to bring in Mohammed Leela, who is here in New York and can obviously join this conversation. Mohammed, give us a sense, clearly, if the Americans are the only non-Arab partner in this coalition of airstrikes, where do we go from here?
Well, this is a very good question because ISIS has proven that it's a very effective fighting force in Syria, in Iraq. And the question now is, well, as much as we know that the airstrikes have been in the works for several days now, ISIS has known this as well. So you can't forget that, you know, they're a well-equipped fighting machine. They're well-armed, and they've proven that they have very successful tactics fighting in that region. So you have to expect that they would have some sort of game plan as well. They would know that these airstrikes are coming. They would have a plan to retaliate possibly. And the most important thing, as far as those of us living in the West are concerned, is that this comes just after a spokesperson for ISIS called on their supporters and their followers in a handful of Western countries, naming the United States, naming France, naming UK, naming Canada, and others, calling on their followers in those countries to attack
and exact brutal revenge on Westerners for airstrikes.
And if those people are in those countries right now, they have their call. That is the call that the airstrikes have started, and their organization has told them now it's time to retaliate.
And yet, Alex, from your vantage point in Turkey, these airstrikes will only accelerate the flood of refugees out of Syria.
Yeah, absolutely. So we assume that the airstrikes are taking place against ISIS targets that would include things like artillery positions, tanks, or weapons depot. But at the same time, ISIS has been very clear, certainly in a place like Raqqa, that they have woven themselves into the sort of fabric of society. So even though the targeting will be going after ISIS specifically, of course that will terrify a lot of the residents of northern Syria. So we can expect in the coming hours and coming days to see yet another wave of refugees heading for the border. I've been speaking with Turkish officials, UN officials, and they are certainly preparing for the possibility of even more refugees to come across these various border crossings in the coming hours and days.
All right. Well, Alex Marquardt, thank you so much for joining us in this conversation from Turkey. Mohammed Leela, thank you for your insights. Once again, recapping, this is breaking news. The Pentagon confirming just a short time ago that the U.S. airstrikes in Syria are now underway, targeting ISIS. Please continue to watch abcnews.com and ABC News Digital for the latest information. We return you now to your programming. Thank you.